address will be given today by Rahim Thawer, and we're really excited to have them here with us today. Rahim is a clinical social worker and psychotherapist based out of Toronto. He works on a health team and as a consultant in private practice. And I'm going to leave a lot of the information for him to actually bring forward on his own, because I think that's really important. But before we move forward, I guess in that capacity, I just kind of really want to thank everybody. And I guess, really to kind of be, just really kind of stress the importance of this opportunity that we've had over the last few weeks together with our students. And today, of course, we have educators from across the province joining us. So I really want to thank all of you for coming in and participating today. And it's so exciting, and I'm doing the thing that I realized I did yesterday in the interview, that until I listened to it, I didn't realize I did. So if you want to just kind of note the number of times, it'll be a learning opportunity for me as I move forward. So it's really important, I guess, as we kind of move forward, that we've realized that the district, in our partnership with CCGSD, we've made a lot of progress, and it's because of the partnership and the partnership with other groups such as Violence Prevention West, who is actually funding our keynote today. Really want to thank them for that. And it's provided us with an opportunity to really celebrate student voice, and there's such power in that, as we know, and that has been evident for those of you that have been partaking in the sessions the last couple of weeks, and as you get the chance to kind of move forward as well. Really kind of taking that opportunity to celebrate student voice, whether we're in our schools or we're kind of in a blended model moving forward in September, or whatever September looks like. It's going to be really important that we really have that opportunity for our students to really celebrate that. So I really want to thank all of you for that. As we move forward today, you're also going to see a message from Tony Stack, our Director of Education, and that's really powerful for us because, of course, he's the leader of our organization here at NLESD, and having that message, I think, really kind of solidifies the support that you do have at our district level to ensure that we are supporting all students, regardless of the diverse backgrounds. So for us, I guess really it's really important to celebrate as well the partnership that we form with CDLI here, with Janice and with Mike Sevier, and I really can't thank you all enough for kind of taking us into your world and showing us around and really becoming a part of the work that we're doing and the celebration of the student voice that this forum has really allowed us to actually present to us. So I just, the global pandemic really presented us with an opportunity to stretch ourselves. And a lot of the work that we'd already started doing back in the fall, when we decided that this was going to happen, that we're going to partner with CDLI to ensure that we have a space for all students, regardless of where you live in this province. So I just really want to thank all of you for coming out, all educators for being here and showing your support. And I just really, again, thank you to CDLI. Thank you to Rahim for being with us today. We are so excited to have you with us, and you come so highly recommended by members of the CCGS team. So on that note, unless there's something else that somebody else from our team would like to say, I just really want to welcome everybody here. And as we move forward, I really want students to hear this message, and all teachers and educators that are on, and everyone that's joining us today, that this is a learning opportunity, not just for our students, but for the district and the center as well. And we are really trying to lead our students by example. And the fact is we are all learners, and we're all coming into this space as learners today, and we're all leaving, I hope, as learners wanting to kind of know more and to know more about how we can be really strong allies as we move forward. So thank you all for coming, and I'm really excited to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to Rahim's message.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Shara. So at this time, we're going to take a moment to bring wishes to everybody on behalf of our NLESD CEO, Tony Stack.
Hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome you to this virtual forum to celebrate the many different and unique qualities you and your fellow students bring to our school community and to our district and our province as a whole. I'm going to be brief. I don't want to take up much of your time. You need to get the very most out of this opportunity with allies and educational partners brought together for your benefit today. I did, however, want to echo the core intention of the gathering, confirm that you are free to be whomever you are. I really believe, as it's stated in our country's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, no matter your differences, each of you, every single student in our system is an equal. You know firsthand how this global pandemic has challenged us to maintain some form of connections that can be formed in our schools. For some of you, this has been a real concern. For others, maybe it's been a bit of a welcome break. But for all of us, it's been a huge adjustment to our lives. Our goal in coming together with our friends at the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity was to make sure you had a safe place where you can see yourselves reflected, a space where you can learn and grow together from like-minded individuals, to share your thoughts and feelings, and to realize that you're not alone. So if you take anything away from the few moments I have with you before you end up in the capable hands of the members of our district team, please know this: no matter how lonely you may feel at times, let this form affirm that you are not alone. I want to thank our safe and inclusive school teams and program staff for their continued work. You know, there's still much work to do, but the goals that have been achieved to date have been wonderful, and I'm very proud of our district staff. You are helping to carry this load with our young people, encouraged by their lead. Make no mistake, what you do has life-saving value. Let's strive to ensure we are all respectful and see the many lessons we can learn from one another. All the best, and have a wonderful day of learning and connecting. Thank you.
All right, so Shara, did we want to bring up the thought exchange now, or will we do that afterwards?
Yes, Cheryl asked that we do that before we move into the keynote, just so people can have that opened, and in case there is any issues that they can kind of work those out.
Okay, just 1 second here now. Just bear with me for 1 second.
And we've just actually put it in the chat bar again as well, the link to the thought exchange and the code to enter the thought exchange. We're really, I guess, from here moving forward, what we're hoping to garner from educators today and students as well, and anyone joining us, is the opportunity for the district to continue to grow a safe learning environment for our 2S LGBTQ+ students, to ensure that they have the opportunity to succeed and thrive. So we'd ask all of you, before you leave us today or after our session, the keynote's over, to go to the Thought Exchange and to use this code to actually enter the form to partake. And it's important for you to understand that there will be no identity kind of disposed to anyone. It'll actually be kept confidential as well. So you're very free to be very honest there.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And so, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Rahim.
Hi, everyone. Janice, can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
All right, great. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me out east. I have very little experience out east in Canada, and so when the pandemic's over, it's on the top of my list to come for a visit. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Rahim Thawer. My pronouns are he and him. As Shara said, I work as a social worker, but that can mean different things depending on what you do. My focus has been mental health, and particularly working with LGBTQ communities. And I've delivered a number of talks about LGBTQ folks and mental health in Manitoba, BC, Ontario, and now very happy to be bringing something to Newfoundland and Labrador. As you can see on the screen, I've got a series of ways you can contact me. You are also, throughout the session, welcome to post questions in the chat box, though the last 30 minutes or 25 minutes will be for Q&A, and all the educators will be bumped out of the room at that time. So it'll be really an opportunity for students to engage and have some dialogue. If anyone wants to get in touch with me, you're welcome to. This session is being recorded, and while it's okay for you to take a screenshot of anything on my slides, I would request that you be cautious and not take any screenshots of the chat box so that people can participate without feeling like they're being watched or surveilled. People might not want that stuff shared. All right, so feeling my feelings. Welcome to this keynote address. Here's what we're going to talk about today. So first, I want us to define mental health and mental wellness. We're going to talk a bit about what it can mean and what it means to you. I also want to talk about the determinants of LGBT2SQ mental health. When I say determinants, what I mean is, what are the things in our life, in our environment, in our economy, in our neighborhood, in our church? What are the things all around us that have a contributing factor to how we feel and how our emotional health is? And then I'm going to talk a bit about, won't spend a long time on this, but the never-ending pandemic. And I say that a bit facetiously, because we know that it will come to an end, but we've learned a lot about mental health on the backdrop of the pandemic, and I want to just highlight some of those things. And then we're going to do a Q&A. So first, I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the province of Newfoundland and Labrador as the ancestral homelands of many diverse populations of Indigenous peoples who have contributed to years of history, including the Beothuk on the island of Newfoundland. Today, this province is home to diverse populations of Indigenous and other people. We would also like to acknowledge, with respect, the diverse histories and cultures of the Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit. As we begin this presentation, I'm going to first ask that we start with an experiential exercise. So if you've got a pen and paper handy, you're going to need those. And if not, just think about this as we go through. So I'm going to put up a list of statements about people. They're very, very brief scenarios. So for example, Layla is in the 12th grade and just received a low grade on her biology test. She's also very unsure about her post-secondary plans. Now, when you hear this very brief scenario about Layla, I want you to write down, what do you think Layla is thinking? What are some of the things going on in her mind? So for example, I don't know what I want. I wish I didn't have all this pressure. I'm not going to get in. I feel like a failure. I hate biology. I'm going to drop sciences. I wonder what my friends are thinking. That's a range of thought that she might be thinking. She might also think my teacher's unfair, school is unfair, I don't like school, right? Those might be some of her other thoughts. Then think about what she might be feeling. So maybe she's feeling sad, embarrassed, disappointed. Maybe she's feeling more determined because she wants to do better on the next test. Maybe she's feeling curious about other educational opportunities that don't involve biological sciences. So you can see that there's a difference between thoughts and feelings. And I want you to just think about what thoughts and feelings each of these people that I present to you might be experiencing. So Rohan wants to join a volleyball team, but has never really fit in with other athletes. He is also more feminine than other guys he knows. So take a moment to write down the thoughts you think Rohan is thinking and the things that he might be feeling. You're welcome to throw some of these in the chat box if you like, or you can write them down as an independent exercise. So the third one, Cameron knows he's different from other guys and regularly skips gym class. What do you think that's about? What do you think Cameron is thinking? What's the connection between feeling different and skipping class? Often in our culture, we think about the feeling avoidant as bad. And in this case, I wonder if Cameron has a bit of avoidance that is protective or to help him. Zane is thinking about asking their friends to start using gender-neutral pronouns when referring to them. It might sound simple enough to some folks, but think about what it might be like. What might Zane anticipate other people saying or doing, and what might they be thinking about that? And if the worst case scenario is true of all of their thoughts, what might they think the consequence is going to be? So these are small statements with big impact. Amber is Catholic and queer. Her family is loving, but she's not sure about her larger religious community. Abdul witnessed and survived war in his country of origin. He's safe now, but stays at home a lot and turns down social invites. Alexi is 15, trans feminine, and wants to talk to a doctor about hormone therapy. I wonder what she's thinking or what she's feeling. I wonder if she's old enough to have her own doctor or explain to her parents that she wants a new doctor. Shaheen works part-time at a coffee shop. Her coworkers don't know that she is attracted to women. Sylvia's friend just shared a picture of her at an LGBTQ event on Instagram. Sylvia has only begun to question her sexual orientation. So anyone who's had social media anxiety might have a sense of what Sylvia's going through. And the last one. Jason and Amir spend a lot of time together. They kissed for the first time before the pandemic. Now they don't get to see each other. Now, why am I talking about thoughts and feelings? I would say the way we think and the way we feel is a big part of what makes up our mental health. So when I think about what my mental health is, a part of it is how I see myself. Am I creative? Am I brave? Am I courageous? Am I too talkative? I was always told that I socialize too much in class, that I make careless mistakes. All of that is not so bad. So maybe that's how I see myself. Maybe I also see myself as strong-headed, stubborn, anxious, get stressed out easily. Doesn't have to be bad, but it's nice to have a picture of how I see myself. And then we all have a picture of how we see the world. And how we see the world is going to be shaped by our experiences of emotional and physical safety in the world. So I might see the world as safe. I might see the world as fair. You might have heard lots of people say things like, well, it all comes out in the wash, or what goes around comes around, or everything happens for a reason. These people are seeing the world in a particular way. They're saying those things because saying those particular ways of thinking help them cope with difficult times or help them sort out complex situations, right? And so they're seeing the world because they've been taught a way to see it, and then they've had additional experiences that support that way of thinking. Maybe somebody's told you everything happens for a reason, but then you've had experiences that doesn't support that worldview. It doesn't support that way of seeing the world. So you might see the world differently. You might say, actually, my day-to-day world is pretty safe and okay, but the world at large is somewhat unfair. That's also okay to think. Now, how you see yourself is going to change as you get more and more life experience, right? And that includes both positive and difficult events. So if I go to my first school dance and I'm really anxious about it because I'm worried about the thoughts that I'm thinking are like, oh, people are going to be kind of cliquey if I'm not dancing with a girl, or I don't have a date, people are going to think weird things about me. Those thoughts and those feelings of fear, embarrassment, anxiety might shift if I have a very positive experience at that dance, right? I might say, hey, I'm pretty cool. Or I'm different from other people, but I can fit in reasonably well. Another thing I might think about myself is it doesn't matter who I'm attracted to because I've got pretty good dance moves. I might have some difficult events. People might make fun of me. I might ask somebody to dance with me, or I might ask a group of people if I can join them, and they might say no. So that rejection or that difficult experience might not make a huge difference to how I see myself, but it certainly can. If I experience homophobia, or someone says, you look gay, or you talk gay, or why do you walk that way? Those kinds of experiences might really change how I see myself. And then my experience of the larger world is also going to change as I have more and more positive and difficult experiences in my life. So lots of people have big experiences. For example, parents getting divorced, having a really big vacation that goes really, really well and is super fun, watching a loved one or seeing a loved one pass away. All of these things, good and bad, start to impact not just how we see ourselves, but how we see the world. And we start to think about the justice or injustice in the world, fairness, unfairness, and the combination of how we see the world and how we see ourselves comes to represent a huge part of what our mental health is. So I hope that this description of mental health is relatable, because lots of people have very big, convoluted definitions. But in the simplest way, mental health is how I'm feeling today, tomorrow, the day after. It's how I feel in particular social situations. It's the difference between feeling good in one setting and feeling bad in another setting, and how I see myself and how I see the world. So what is mental health to you? You might be asking yourself that. Well, how each of us sees mental health is going to differ. Now, it depends on how people around you, whether it's your family, your religious community, your teachers, your siblings, how people in your life talk about their mental health, right? So if they use language like, oh, I'm so OCD, oh, I'm so depressed, or that person is so schizophrenic, if they use mental health language in a way that is disparaging or not helpful, or in a way that doesn't accurately describe what they're experiencing, you might be more afraid to talk about mental health more candidly, and you won't have good examples of how to talk about mental health. So you might also have people in your life who say, oh, today I'm feeling quite sad, but I think it's because I watched something really difficult or disturbing on YouTube yesterday. You might also say, I've been feeling really down lately after my grandmother passed away, or I've been feeling really low and conflicted and almost guilty after watching videos of police brutality in the media recently. You could see the difference of how people might talk about their mental health, and then how you come to understand it and what it means to you. Growing up and culturally speaking, you might also think about how mental health and wellness is talked about in your home. And I talk about the home specifically because we all have a culture, and we all have a culture that comes from our immediate and extended family. And I can tell you from my experience that often mental health and wellness is not talked about as much, but mental illness is. What I mean by that is, in different languages, English included, we often find ways to describe people that are unwell or having a tough time. Less so, we see those folks as so different than us. And when we see them as so different than us, we don't think about the spectrum of doing well and having times when you feel unwell. Because in truth, a lot of us live a lot of years. So if you live to be 85 years old, I bet you there's going to be a patch of time in your life when you're feeling down, when you're feeling anxious, when you're affected by grief and loss, or you have a terrible breakup and you're consumed with sadness. We all have a mental health just like we all have a physical health. The problem is that in our dominant culture, we often think about illness without thinking about overall well-being. So we all have a mental health, even in the absence of a diagnosis around mental illness. I would also ask, what is your current relationship to emotion? Does it guide you? Do you say, I am feeling sad right now, therefore I need this, or I want to do this, or I think doing this won't be a good idea? Do you push it away? Does it feel overwhelming? Does it scare you? Sometimes when we're exposed to abuse or violence in our lives, any kind of intense emotion feels scary and we don't want to deal with it because we've only seen big emotions handled in really difficult ways or problematic ways. So maybe big emotion scares us. Maybe you think emotion gets in the way. And I like that one in particular because a lot of people are taught to connect with emotion in particular ways based on their gender assigned at birth. And then we learn to engage with that emotion in a way that may not be helpful. As a boy, I was always taught to not have as much emotion. I've been taught to think that emotion gets in the way of getting things done. Now that's going to be tricky, huh? If I want to talk about a difficult experience of homophobia or an experience of being left out or really being attracted to a boy and not knowing, the anxiety of like wanting to go up to him, I can't talk about what I'm feeling because I've been taught that feelings get in the way, that they're bad. And we've talked a bit about mental health and wellness, how we see it, what impacts it, and in our day-to-day lives, what we're going to come to use to define our relationship to emotion and wellness. Now I want us to focus on the determinants of LGBT2SQ mental health. And then we'll get to the never-ending pandemic. So, determinants. When I say the word determinants, what I mean is things in our environment that contribute to our overall well-being. So if I'm struggling with sadness or depression or low mood or grief, anger, loss, anxiety, stress, and somebody says, hey, just think differently, think more positive. That might be helpful, but it might not. It's true that if I change the way I think, I can also change the way I feel, but I can only work on changing the way I think if I have a supportive environment. And that means people who I'm talking to who give me that advice to think positive, it's only going to be helpful if they understand the things in my environment that are difficult and that contribute to me not feeling so good, right? So what I'm saying here is that your mental health might feel like it's just individual, an individual experience. And I want to make clear that our mental health is both individual and environmental. So if a particular community, for example, if I were to talk about Indigenous communities or LGBTQ communities, if we're talking about people who on a big scale we see have high rates of suicidality or high rates of substance use problems, I would say that's not an individual problem. That's not because there's something wrong with those communities. That is a result of those communities growing up in a world that's not been very supportive and likely hasn't been supported for multiple generations. So that's why we have to talk about determinants. So what are some things that impact us as LGBTQ folks? Perhaps knowing that we're different early on. Lots of people say this. I don't have language for what I am or who I am, or I don't know how to describe myself, but I know that I'm different. And once you know you're kind of different, your lens, you wear like special glasses is the way I think about it, and you start to see the world through a different lens. The lens from the margins. If you think about a piece of paper and you think about all the notes you put in the margins, that's where a lot of us are. We're looking in on a mainstream community. We're looking at a dominant story. We're looking at all the sitcoms we see on TV are basically in the dominant story. And in the margins, we're taking notes about how we fit into that story and how we don't. So it's no wonder that from an early age, a lot of us feel quite isolated because we don't see ourselves on that main page. We're just in the margins taking notes about what fits and all of the things that don't fit, right? So knowing that we're different early on might impact us in different ways. You might be a burst of energy. You might be a whole host of shining colors, a big splash, and you might really celebrate how different you are. For a lot of people, they might actually feel more anxious, more withdrawn, keep to themselves, worry about sharing too much about themselves. And then we think about the coming out process, right? What do I want to come out as, right? What if I don't know who I am, or I don't know what label fits? What if I say I am gay, but I'm actually bisexual? What if I say I'm bisexual and somebody else says, well, then does that mean you can choose who you want to be attracted to? And then we have to think about who I'm going to come out to. Who's going to be the safest person? For a lot of us, we choose to come out to our families last. Why is that? Maybe we think that they are the closest to us and therefore the scariest, but also the most important. Maybe we want to come out to people whom we know are going to be most supportive and affirming to begin with. It's hard to say, but I can tell you that figuring out how to come out, what to come out as, and who to come out to is a huge stressor for a lot of us. I think about it as a chronic stressor. It's like if everybody's got 2 binders in their backpack, we've got 2 binders and 3 bricks, because we are carrying around the worry about not just coming out, the control of coming out. Who might come out? Who might out me before I out myself, or I'm ready to tell people more about me? That's another worry that we have. And then we have to sort out stereotypes. There's so many stereotypes about queer and trans people in the world, right? And it takes a long time to wrap our heads around it, because often we want to say, hey, I am not that stereotype. And then sometimes we are the stereotype. The thing is, the stereotype is not always bad. It actually should be a generalization about a group of people. And maybe that generalization fits for you and maybe it doesn't. The problem is that we think about it as a negative stereotype because a lot of straight communities and cisgender, non-transgender communities have seen us in a particular way. And they've said, this generalization about you is bad. So you're too feminine, or you can't do these jobs, or you should only be in these career domains, or maybe they'll say we're an abomination, or they will say that we are unnatural, or people have all kinds of terrible things to say about us. And the kinds of things that might be true is that, you know, we're artistic, we're smart, maybe we're flamboyant, maybe we do gravitate towards certain career types. Not all of us. Maybe some of us are drag queens. Some of us grow up to be in open relationships. Who knows? Some of the stereotypes might be bad. Some might just be generalizations, right? But we're taught to be afraid of all of the stereotypes. So it takes a long time for us to sort out what fits and what doesn't. Then we have the torment of being visible and the grief of being erased. What does that mean? So I grew up being very visible. I am a femme gay man. And so that means people were saying, you're so gay, before I knew I was so gay. And now if somebody tells me I'm so gay, I would say, duh, of course, what else would I be? But here's the thing. Being a feminine guy shouldn't mean that you're gay necessarily. Straight men should also be able to be feminine. The second thing is, if you are visible and you are visibly gay and people make that assumption and it's true, it can be really tough because you don't get a chance to sort through what you want to tell people because they've already labeled you and you are rushing to catch up. The other difficulty is if you're really invisible and people don't read you or look at you and assume you're gay or think anything about you is queer, you might really struggle to have to come out to everybody all of the time. Both things can be pretty tough. Now, a lot of us have grown up in religious communities, and a lot of us might still be religious. The truth is, religion can be really good and empowering and supportive, and it can be a system or an institution with a lot of growth. It can get us religion, and people who have a lot of religiosity can often get through really difficult times because they have resiliency built into the ways that they think. But religious teachings often moralize LGBT identities. What does that mean? That means that they often send us messages about us not enough or us being against God or us being deficient. Now, those teachings can really, really be painful. So if you've grown up in a religious institution or in a religious community, that might be a particular thing that you have to work through. That's the imposition of the gender binary. So if you don't fit neatly into being a boy or a girl, things like gym class, bathrooms, any sports activity, public places might be a bit of a nightmare. Because you might say, I don't know where to fit in or where I fit in, and I'm so tired of having to pick where I fit in. This is really awful, and it makes me feel really awful. When people feel really awful about their gender all of the time because society doesn't give them enough options to express who they are, that feeling is more than just anxiety or depression. We often call that dysphoria. And then we have to deal with outright homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia, right? Now that could be very explicit, or that could show up in a small way, right? Somebody could say something really nasty to us, or somebody could assume that our life experience doesn't matter or is not okay. We also have a lot of non-shared experiences in many social contexts. So like I said, we're taking notes on the margins, and that turns out to be a non-shared experience that gives us a well-developed idea about how we might fit in or not fit in. So it's not surprising that even after we come out, a lot of us have a lot of social anxiety, right? Because we have so many experiences that are different than our straight peers or our cisgender peers, and that shifts how we engage with social contexts all the time. So going to a new place, a new classroom, a new job, a new anything is always a bit different for us. I want to talk a bit about the classroom context. So people say, that's so gay all the time, right? And that's a small example of how we need to change our language, because when people say that's so gay, they usually mean something else. But if they don't think about the impact of what they're saying, what they're essentially saying is that gay equals stupid, silly, unfortunate, foolish, corrupt, ridiculous, and on, right? And we call that, even if some people might say, we don't mean it to be homophobic, it might be experienced as what's called a microaggression, right? And so I really like this poster that challenges people to use words that actually state what they mean. Now, we talked about the determinants, the things that impact our mental health. What are the implications for our mental health? So those are things in our environment, then what happens in our bodies? So maybe we have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and problem substance use, right? So if I know, if I've experienced a lot of rejection in my life and I'm really anxious to go to university for the first time and go to Frosh Week, lots of people might be drinking for the first time in Frosh Week, right? But a lot of why they're drinking is because they can. Part of why I might be drinking is because I want to fit in and I'm desperately trying to avoid feelings of anxiety or people finding out that I'm gay or being left out because I'm gay, right? So two groups of people doing the same thing, drinking. For one group of people, it's kind of like a normal thing that they're doing at a particular time in their life, and it might phase out. We see higher rates of problem drug and alcohol use in LGBTQ communities, not because drugs and alcohol are inherently bad, but because our relationship to them can be different, right? When we start to use substances, we might feel somehow an alleviation of anxiety that's been there from a very, very long time. So in fact, what I'm saying is that problem substance use is connected to experiences of homophobia and internalized shame. We might also have some strategies to avoid ridicule. So if we've had bad experiences in social situations, we might protect ourselves, right? And protecting ourselves to other people might look like introversion or depression, but we might just like to stay at home. And being an introvert is a-okay. But if you feel like you're going inward when you'd rather be going more outward, you might think, hey, how did I develop this strategy to protect myself and why did I have to do that? It might be something to do with your environment. It might not have to do with something being specifically wrong with you. When we're really isolated and we can't talk about our feelings, we can't talk about our experiences, or we talk about them and they don't get validated or affirmed, we see increased suicidality in our communities. Now, suicidality is not about it's not about it's not specifically about dying by suicide. It is when our depression or our sadness gets so intense because our isolation is so intense that we start to think really dark thoughts. And those dark thoughts tiptoe into this realm of ending one's life. Now, it's so hard to talk about this, but we do have high rates of suicidality in our communities. So people are thinking these dark thoughts, and some people are acting on these thoughts. And I want to tell you that you are not alone. And I think that that is very important, that if you're having a hard time right now, there is help out there. There are other people like you. And we need to continue to reduce the isolation so that we can see a reason to live on. Now, shame is an interesting thing. We feel shame, and our shame gets activated in so many situations, right? Shame on a small scale is when we feel like embarrassed or discouraged, right? I failed a test, or I went up on stage at an open mic and I didn't do so well, right? That's small scale shame. Big scale shame is when I feel as a whole person, I'm not enough or I'm less than other people. Now, that is really tricky because that, you'll recall, is a big part of mental health, right? That is how I see myself, likely after a ton of difficult life experiences. What do I do when I've internalized so much shame? It's a lot of work to work through that and to rise above it. We might also, a lot of us are familiar with anticipation of loss and sometimes actual loss. What do I mean by that? So often when we're thinking about coming out, we're thinking about worst case scenarios, like people rejecting us completely or us having to choose a new group of friends. Some of us might even worry that our families will disown us or abandon us, and then we'll be without housing and we won't have financial security to do things we want, like further education or go to summer camp or whatever it is. So for a long time, before we even come out, we're anticipating loss. We're anticipating worst case scenario. And that is such a huge stressor on our psyches. It makes it really difficult to focus on school, focus on making friends, focus on anything. And some of us have had the misfortune of coming out and having that actual loss. I can't speak to Newfoundland and Labrador, but I know that in Ontario, of the homeless population of youth, of all the youth that make up our homeless population, about 40 to 50% of them are LGBTQ youth. Now that is a very big number, right? And if it's big here, I'm sure that something like that also exists in other parts of the country. We also have a lot of uncertainty about relationships, right? I think as a therapist, I work with a lot of gay men, a lot of trans people who often say, you know, what's challenging is like I live so long on the margins, not seeing myself represented in media, books, curricular materials, and I just don't know what my relationships are going to look like. I haven't seen them. There's no script for how they're going to pan out. And so that makes me worry about whether or not I'll meet somebody, what that relationship will be like, if I'll ever be able to introduce my partner to my family, if I'll ever have a home or a family the way other people do. That's a big stress to have. Now, if we talk about the determinants of mental health, we have to talk about the safety of our school environments because we spend a lot of time there. Now, the next few slides are going to refer to something called the Every Teacher Project. Okay, this is a school project that was done in 2015, and it was based in Manitoba, but it was a national project where some students were interviewed, but largely teachers were interviewed. So there was a lot of people interviewed. So there was a short interview and a long interview. The short one, about 3,400 teachers participated in, and then there was a more in that about 1,700 teachers participated in. Now, in terms of concrete numbers, in Newfoundland and Labrador, there was 139 teachers that responded to the questionnaires and the interviews. So that's a good number. In the grand scale of things, it's only 4% of the respondents in all of Canada, but still a big number. Now, when we look at this slide, I want you to pay attention to the purple line and the gray line. So this question asked teachers what they thought the school safety for LGB, so lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and separately transgender students was by region. Now you might be asking, why did they join the Atlantic provinces in Quebec, the territories in Labrador? The short answer is, I don't know. But for our benefit, I want us to look at this and think about this average. So if we look at the 79% of LGBT students and the 61% of transgender students, roughly, if we go in between there, we're looking at about 70% of teachers, right? So there's a good number of teachers that saying school feels safe for queer and trans students, but they're also saying that people who fit into binaries, LGBT students, are doing better. They're safer emotionally and physically than transgender non-binary students. Okay, so that's worrisome. That lets us know that some people's rights, progress, and education about certain communities has gone further than others. It also means when we talk about safety that bullying is being experienced more by trans students. Now you'll see that if you look at the two graphs, this is true across the country. Okay, you might also see that provinces that have bigger populations seem to have lower levels of safety, and provinces with a smaller population sometimes seem to have a higher rate of safety. Now, I would be cautious about this. This tells me that, in smaller places or a place where the population is smaller but more spread out, teachers might not have the best representation of what's going on with students because students are less connected and things that are going on in the student population are sometimes less visible. So just keep that in mind. Now, this question asks educators' perception. So what do educators think versus what do LGBTQ students think about harassment in school? And they broke it down into verbal harassment, rumors, cyberbullying, physical harassment, property stolen or damaged, named in graffiti, and sexual harassment. The blue line in the bar graph represents what students thought. What's represented in the green line is what educators thought. So what's really interesting here is that educators across the board thought that different levels of harassment were higher than the students reported them. You might ask, how the heck is that? How do teachers think that things are worse off than students do? Well, here's the thing. A lot of us students, and I've been one of them, we sometimes live in a bit of a bubble, right? Teachers get to see things that are happening in different groups of friends, and they get to see things that are happening in different cohorts of students, right? So one year after the other, they have a bigger global perspective of what they're seeing. So in this instance, I want us to trust the teachers a bit more. However, when we go down to sexual harassment, we see that way more teachers thought that this was not as much of a problem, whereas students rated this much higher. So you'll see that 40% of students thought that said that they've experienced this kind of harassment, whereas only 23% of teachers said that they don't see this as a huge problem. So what we're seeing here is that sexual harassment likely happens outside of school or outside of the forefront of the classroom. So what is sexual harassment, right? It could be so many things. It could be brushing up against somebody in a sexually inappropriate way. It could be playing a game that you might think is harmless but is sexual in nature, like spin the bottle, somebody very, very uncomfortable when they don't consent to it or they don't feel good about going into it. Sexual harassment can also be staring at somebody, following them, looking them up and down in a suggestive or inappropriate way. If you give somebody excessive attention, always liking their things on social media, they might feel a bit awkward about it, and it might be a bit uncomfortable in a sexual way. Maybe you're sharing stories or you're sharing a joke that's sexual in nature that makes other people really uncomfortable, right? And then we also have inappropriate touching, but in our world today, sharing of media posts or sending people unsolicited sexual material by text or WhatsApp or Instagram or Snapchat, right? Those can all be examples of sexual harassment. All right, this is one of the last figures I'm going to show you. So teachers had to rate their level of agreement to the statement that LGBTQ seem to focus on the ways in which they differ from heterosexuals and ignore the ways they are the same. So teachers are being asked, do you think that these students focus too much on how we're different versus how we're the same? Now, I'm going to get you to look at this graph in a very specific way. Let's look at all of the provinces, okay? I want you to look at the yellow, the agree, and the green, which is neutral, and pretend they're all one. Because this statement is secretly an all lives matter statement. And what I mean by that is you can't be neutral on this statement. If you think that if you're not sure if people focus too much on the ways that they're different, what you're not getting is that they do in fact have distinct experiences of discrimination or microaggression, or they see the world in a different way that you're not going to understand, or that a straight person might not see or understand. And we need to talk about those things to shift the culture in our environment around us. So what am I saying here? That going from right to left, in BC 50%, Alberta, Saskatchewan 31%, Manitoba 38%, Ontario 50%, Atlantic Canada and Quebec 42%, and in the territories in Labrador 35%. Those are very low numbers for people who disagree with this statement. Those are very, very low numbers for people who disagree with that statement. And those are the educators that are on our side who understand what the heck we're talking about. So, lots of work to be done. Now, it's really interesting. Sometimes teachers say things like, well, I don't know if it's my job to educate students about LGBT issues. But this survey did a really interesting thing. It asked teachers how they might have been harassed when they were much younger. Very interesting. So it seems like a lot of teachers have experienced bullying in their own experience for a variety of reasons. And included in that list, very high up, fourth from the left, is perceived to be LGBTQ. And on the list is also girl that acted too much like a boy, or boy that acted too much like a girl, right? So these things have to do with our sexuality and our gender identity. And because teachers in large proportions have had experiences like this as minors, they're in a unique place to empathize with students. Here's a video I'd like to show you.
I'm sorry. No, like you have to say yes.
No, I'm not.
Wait, you didn't
He looks
say yes?
like Channing Tatum. Okay, a little bit
So
different.
good
He has
looking.
darker hair, but he's the second hottest guy in the senior
It doesn't
year.
even matter. Yo, you guys.
What?
Oh my god, he's so hot. Isn't he hot? Hannah.
Tim.
He's so cute. Oh, yeah, he's pretty cute.
Pretty
So
cute? Oh my god, he's so hot. I can't even look directly at him.
Oh, screw Canada. Hey, Hannah. You okay? You were pretty distracted at lunch today. Oh, yeah, I think I was just tired, is all. Same here. I was up studying for anatomy all night and so tired. Oh, well, if you want, I can help you study. Are you serious? Yeah, of course. Oh my god, thank you so much. I love you. Thank you so much. Do you want to come over for a sleepover tonight? Yeah, I'd love to. Oh, I gotta go. See you later. Okay. Okay.
All right, Hannah, now you're going to deliver your sign and then take Jen's hand. Try it like that.
Don't worry, sis. Nothing bad will happen while I'm gone. I promise.
And take her hand. Hannah, go ahead and take Jen's hand.
Take my hand. anti-lesbian.
Perfect. Now, Jen, your line's next.
Hey guys, any plans this weekend? No, not really. Oh, okay, well, I'm having a get-together on Sunday. Maybe I'll see you there? Maybe. Okay, well, have a good weekend. God, I swear she's like obsessed with me. What a... Whoa. Why are you defending her?
Hey, Hannah, is it okay if Kiki comes with us after school?
Oh, yeah, that's totally cool.
All right, well, I'll see you later then.
Okay, bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Hey, you okay over there?
Oh, yeah, I'm good. Guess who I just found on Tinder? Come on. Oh, God. Okay, William or Kenny? Kenny. You told me he asked you out last week, though. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm not... He's so cute. Just say yes. Is, but there's like... Say yes, he's weird. So cute. Who cares if he's on Tinder? Hannah, I feel like you never talk about boys. Yeah, like, what do you like? How do we not know this? You have to tell us. I don't know, I don't really like talking about that stuff. What? Come on. I mean, you must like someone if you're gonna say that. What? Right? What? No, I don't know. I don't like anyone. I don't know. Hannah, you can tell us anything. Yeah. Are you not straight? I don't know. Oh, well, that's okay. Yeah, you'll figure it out. So anyway, you have to say yes. I don't know about it. It's so cute. Do you know how many girls are after this? See, that's the problem. Tell her. You should give Kenny a shot. There's no buff guys left in this world. You got to go out with him. I'm serious. Buffing you. Yes.
All right, so this video really makes me think about, and it reminds me about how our mental health and our sense of identity, who we are and how we fit into social situations, follows us everywhere we go, right? We don't put a pause on our mental health. We don't put a pause on our identity, right? And what I really like in this video is that you see this young girl going through many contexts where she's experiencing microaggressions, she's witnessed to explicit homophobia, and all of those messages in her environment give her a sense of how people feel about her. Even though her friends kind of give her this like acceptance in the end, you know, their acceptance wasn't bad, but I do wonder, you know, to what degree does it discount all the things they said before and what she witnessed before? So I just want to talk briefly about harassment and outcomes. So if we get bullied, if we feel excluded, right? So there's a strong connection between heterosexist bullying, which means bullying for your gender and sexuality, right? And so there's a connection between that type of bullying at school with a variety of mental health problems, increased depressive symptoms, low self-esteem, and like we said before, suicidality. The same study that I'm referring to, though, also says that the presence of supportive educators not only increases the safety and belonging, but is also related to higher GPAs and higher educational aspirations among LGBT students. So I think that's really promising. What that says to me is that a lot of us queer and trans people, we see the world differently. We have some pretty unique experiences. And if you combine those unique experiences and unique ways of seeing the world, if that's combined with a supportive educational and home environment, we can do some pretty fabulous things. we can be really great achievers. So there's a lot of hope for us. And it lets me know that we have a big role to play in society at large. So let's talk a bit about this never-ending pandemic. So as of March something, or maybe for you folks, it was just a very long Easter break. For people in other parts of the country, it was a very long March break that just never ended, right? And we had plans. We were going to do things. We were figuring out how we wanted to spend our summer, how we wanted to spend the warmer months, how we were going to end the year, how some of us were going to graduate. We did that together. Now suddenly we're all apart. They say, well, not they say, one specific study that's already been published this year says that during epidemics, the number of people whose mental health is affected tends to be greater than the number of people affected by the infection. Right? So I'm going to talk a bit about grief. Grief is a response to loss, right? So around the world, we've been seeing a lot of death. Maybe in your home province or in your home community, there hasn't been a lot of infection or a lot of loss. But loss isn't just tangible. It's not just what you can see. It's not just the loss of a human being. It's also intangible, right? We have grief about all kinds of things that we imagined were going to happen that don't happen or that cannot happen and that aren't happening, that aren't in our control. And collectively, we might grieve things like summer plans, loss of normalcy, like being self-isolated, not being able to do the things we like to do. For queer people, I would argue that collective grief looks different, right? We might really, really, really rely on some of our queer pals at school or in some of the extracurricular programs that we attend, because those spaces give us a kind of refuge or sanctuary from our homes where who we are or being who we are may not always be celebrated, right? People often say, love yourself, and then you can love someone else. I think we learn to love ourselves first in connection with other people, right? And so we need queer spaces, and the pandemic has probably created a lot of loss for us. If we thought we were going to attend something, maybe we didn't, or we couldn't, or not in the way that we thought we were going to. I also think about queerness as a way we show up in the world, how we look, how we dress, how we talk, our pop cultural references, how we express ourselves. And that can be a huge part of our identity. And you can't really do that at home. Like you kind of can, but it's a bit harder. So you might not get to express yourself or be who you want to be in a social sense as a result of the pandemic. So there's some loss, and then that means there's some grief. So what does grief look like for you? Is it sadness? Is it hard getting out of bed? Is it lack of motivation? There's probably a progression of losses that you've experienced through this pandemic, right? So a lot of people first thought social distancing means school's out, I'm going to party. Let's have everybody over for barbecue. But I remember reading an article very clearly on March 13th that said, social distancing, this is not a snow day. They reminded us that a pandemic means we actually can't enjoy ourselves. The things we think we can do, we cannot. And as a result, the concept of time has changed. I've seen lots of people who have, in my therapy practice, who have had HIV or cancer diagnoses in their life. And when they get a new diagnosis, sometimes they see time as very different. You might feel the same if you've had a loved one die in your life. You start to see time as very different. Maybe you see it as limited. Maybe you think about how you need to do things differently. Chronic illness is similar to a pandemic in that it makes us think about time differently. So we might experience things like regret. I didn't do enough before lockdown, or anxiety. I need to get a lot done during lockdown, or sadness. When will this end? Maybe this will never end, and I will never get to do the things I used to want to do. Maybe we'll never go back to normal. Some people are feeling deflated and don't want to do anything, and other people are saying, hey, now's the time to do a workout, to eat well, to write a book, to do, etc., whatever the things are, play a new instrument. I think that all has to do with the pressure of time, and some people are wanting to lay flat and say this is way too much, and other people are saying do more, 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 more. So what I'm suggesting here is that a pandemic is explicitly about loss, and it changes how we think about time. And so whatever you're doing right now, even if you're not directly impacted by the pandemic or you're not impacted by lives lost, you have probably experienced a loss of normalcy. And that is on the backdrop of a pandemic, and your sense of time might have shifted a little bit. Then there's the ambiguity of grief, right? When somebody feels anxious, they know it. When they feel depressed, they know it. But when they feel grief, it's a bit more ambiguous. They might say, hey, I've been feeling up and down. If they're anticipating more grief, it's with every week we think, oh, they've extended the state of emergency. Now there's another thing I won't be able to do. Now there's another thing I won't be able to do. And when there comes a certain point where we might say, well, there's another thing I won't be able to do, so what's the point? Right? So this is what I call a progression of losses that a lot of us might have experienced on the backdrop of the pandemic or in the midst of the pandemic. The last thing I want to talk about is the brutality that was caused by the police in the United States and in Toronto, Canada, just over the last month and a half. And it's from what I saw in the news with we've all seen the protests all over the continent and in a lot of countries actually. But Newfoundland and Labrador, so Newfoundland, I think St. John's had a protest in support of Black lives just this past weekend. And someone named Brian Amady said in this article by the CBC, it's been my experience that when you try to get people to talk about it, they, vocally or even silently, try to stop you from saying anything because they just feel personally attacked, even if you're trying to explain to them that it's the system. So Brian Amady is a Black person living in Newfoundland. From what I got in the article, he lives in St. John's, and he's talking about his experience of educating other people about the presence of racism in Newfoundland. And you might say, hey, what does this have to do with LGBTQ2F mental health? Everything. I have to say that we have to be very careful not to think about equality or equity as a single issue struggle, right? We can be queer and from a racial minority group. We could be queer and Indigenous. We might be queer and living with a disability. We might be queer and economically disadvantaged. We might be queer and experience a lot of sexism. So we need to think about the bigger struggles in the world and how queerness is part of that. So while we've been grieving, you might have also seen yourself adapt and become very resilient, right? So here are some new things we've been doing. Suddenly, we've become very good at technology and cooking. We've had rapid adaptations. Everything is now online. We're having virtual parties, virtual hangouts. We're doing more online than we could ever possibly imagine. We're learning to connect in new ways. People are having dinner over Zoom. And because we're kind of isolated, it's a unique opportunity actually to work through all of our feelings about who we are and the state of the world in a bit of a laboratory. We're on our own. We have to figure it out. We don't always have somebody to bounce it off of. So that can be distressing, but the plus side of it is it can be a nice time for reflection. We also probably have an emerging relationship to sex and our bodies. What does that mean? Well, we have no choice but to cook and eat with our families. And a lot of LGBTQ people struggle with body image and our relationship to food. And so when you have to eat all the time and you have to eat with families, we might be struggling to do that, or we might be healing in a way to be able to eat with other people. We're probably also learning to practice self-compassion because you kind of have to. All right, we've gone through all of the 4 objectives of this talk. Now it's time for the Q&A. So there are my social media handles. Follow me, ask me questions, whatever you like, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen in one moment, and we're going to ask the educators to then leave, and we're going to do a Q&A and a bit of a discussion. Unfortunately, we probably only have about 15 minutes, but I'm going to try to respond to as many comments as we've got in the chat box. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be welcomed to Atlantic Canada when I am not specifically from that part of the country, and so I hope what I've shared and imparted resonates and is useful, and you find it helpful. And in my culture, when we end something, we often ask for a kind of forgiveness if there's been any misstep or any feelings hurt or something that's been said that's been inappropriate. So if there's been any short-sightedness on my part, I apologize. It was unintentional. Thank you for being here.